Hi everyone, Deb Slater-Lee. I'm from the State NRM office. I've been there for about 7 years now. And today I just wanted to quickly run you through our grants, a little bit of an oversight, but more importantly, for those of you who have applied or been successful with our grants, we've got some new features and I really want to concentrate on those. Particularly, and I also want to really concentrate on what assessors are looking for. So I'm just going to do my screen sharing thing for you right now. Okay, so obviously we run the community stewardship grants. Applications are open right now and they will be closing in about 4 weeks' time, but we'll go through that timeline in just a moment. I'm going to quickly skip through these because I want to spend most of my time doing concentrating on what the assessors are looking for. This year we have the small and the large assessment, the small and the large projects. Not too much has changed. There's a few, I don't know whether you can see no, you can't see my cursor here. There's a few small adjustments to this, but I'll go into further detail as we go down. I'm going to quickly skip through this selection criteria. So essentially, it's fairly similar to what it was last year, but there has been a small tweak in point 1, which is around community involvement, and those can be found in the guidelines as well. The critical path for assessment, obviously we're open now. Applications close on the 15th of June, so coming up soon. Over July, we will be doing the individual assessments and the panel meeting. In September, and this is the bit that takes often a bit of time, in September the NRM ministers will approve, and there are 3 of them. So they're the Minister for Water, Environment and Agriculture, with Minister McTiernan and the Minister for Agriculture being the lead. And then we anticipate successful projects being announced in November. Hopefully earlier if we can manage to work our magic. Applying online as per usual. Smarty Grants is our friend, and all of your contract management will be done through Smarty Grants. So let's get to the good stuff. What's new? So firstly, we've moved. We're no longer in South Perth. We're actually in 140 William Street now in the city, which has been a little bit of an adjustment, I have to say. This year also, we have an additional $500,000, which is super exciting, particularly in these fiscally restrained times. Our small projects are now up to 18 months. There's a couple of reasons for this. Is one of the things we found was that 12 months of project for the 12-month allowance for the small grants just wasn't enough time, particularly for the smaller guys who are doing rollover projects, to actually complete the project, quit it and move on. So it was nice to have that sort of 6 months, of crossover. The limitations have also been changed. So there's a removal of those limitations of the active project. So that got pretty confusing for people. What we were trying to do is make sure that everyone got a fair crack at the money, essentially. So this year, going backwards, the active projects, while there's no limitation on those, you still need to be not in breach of contract, which means you have to be up to date with your progress reporting, any variations that need doing, and also the your final acquittals. An unlimited number of submissions. However, you will only be able to be successful for 1 large and 2 small grants. These, all of this details in page 7 in the guidelines, and I'm going to drive you crazy by keeping saying about the guidelines. So mapping, the new feature, there's a new feature in Smarty Grants, which basically when you put your project location in, it will put a dot on the map. For many projects, that's all they need to do in regard to the mapping. But however, if you are doing any on-ground work, you will need to provide a map for each site, plus an overarching map that, that basically shows where those sites sit in a landscape. Again, page 11 in the guidelines. Sponsorship. For some of you, for many of you, this isn't going to be relevant, but for those who are either thinking about getting sponsored or sponsoring someone, only unincorporated groups can apply. So if you are incorporated, you must apply in your own right. Sponsorship, whoever the sponsor is will be under contract to the State NRM office. There is a maximum of 10% sponsorship fee. Again, page 21 in the guidelines will give you tons of detail. The other thing that we've implemented this year is land access permissions and landholder agreements. Now, this is really important stuff. It's mainly relevant for people who are doing on-ground works on private land. Now, for some people who are doing, you know, workshops, for instance, you don't need to ask permission for to actually from the venue people to actually hold that. But if you are doing on-ground work, you need to ask firstly the owner and secondly the manager. Mostly they're the same person, but occasionally they're not. For instance, if DBCA owns some land, but one of the shires are actually managing it, then you need to seek permissions from both. The evidence at application stage does not need to be much. It can be as simple as an email, whatever, you know, just to show that you've actually started those conversations. You will need to provide a landholder agreement at contracting phase should your project be successful. And you will need to use the State NRM landholder agreement form, which has been developed. Page 19, again, gives you tons more detail. Asset management. We used to say that, that the advice that we got internally was that if you bought something, an asset which we're considering over $2,500, if you buy something that, or you know, for a camera, for instance, that is, sorry, just had a little mental blank. Let me start that again. So it used to be that the state owned that asset. And now we're saying, well, no, the state actually doesn't want to be responsible for that asset. So the asset will belong to the applicant. However, there are a few little provisos. Page 18 in the guidelines will help you understand what that is. So let's get on to what assessors are looking for. The thing that I really need you guys to understand is that the assessors have upwards of 200 applications to assess. They typically get around 3 weeks, but that's not 3 weeks full time. Most of these assessors are also working full time. So typically they would spend the equivalent of a week full time assessing those. Now, if you do the maths, that's not much time per assessment. So you really need to make your application super easy to read so that it's articulate, it's succinct, and you can just fly through it and go, this is a great application. The longer, I say this each time, but the longer you have to spend on an application, the grumpier the assessor gets. So we want a well-justified argument that is just easy to read. Everyone knows what it means to tell a story. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. If you think about what a good storyteller does, you know, go and read the old Grimm's fairy tales, etc. They actually have a bit of a formula. Follow that same formula. It works for everything, including at your applications. So we want to see clear outcomes at the end of the project. The storytelling, really important. Great value for money, partnerships and collaboration, leveraging, and transparency. The transparency basically means if you have something that you're not sure about and you're thinking, this could be a deal breaker, you know, I'm not going to put it in. I'm going to try and just sort of move around it. Assessors have a sixth sense, a spider sense to actually pick on something and goes, hang on a minute, that doesn't make sense. So if you're not sure about something, if you haven't got quite all the information, say so. Just come straight out and say it. The flip side of that is what assessors don't want to see are requests that are unjustified or outside guidelines. I can't emphasise enough, read your guidelines. Poorly planned, double dipping, and that basically means actually I won't go into detail, that's probably a longer conversation which we're more than happy to have on an individual basis ongoing. Coordination and salary requests that are unreasonable or unjustified. This basically drops your value for money perspective. All of that other stuff is fairly obvious. Work plans that don't use the correct template and applications that haven't been proofread. Again, imagine an assessor sitting up at 2 o'clock in the morning, assessing your grant, and if there's multiple errors and typos all over the place, their cranky pants start to come on. Hints and tips. Read the guidelines. Can't emphasize this enough. We've got a fancy new format, so hopefully you enjoy that. Use plain language. Don't try and outsmart yourself. Just say it. I mean, as I said, 10 to 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes for a bigger project to read an application. If anyone has to go looking for what something means or doesn't understand something, it starts to become difficult to support the project. Again, remember why you're writing the application. You are writing it for an assessment panel, and this is really critical. Make it simple for them to love your project. While there's a whole ton of knowledge and skills in the panel, it's a big state and we cover so many issues and so many groups. So make it easy for them. Don't assume that they know the problem, the project, or any location. Again, show the logic. It's around that storytelling again. You've got a problem, you want a solution, this is how you're going to get there. And please spend lots of time on your work plan. There's a couple of things that I look at when I'm assessing a grant, and one of the first thing is I'll look at the text, and if the context is there and I go, this is actually a great looking project, I'll then go on to the work plan. And in the work plan, that's where some of those little things that I'm not sure about will be answered. It's not called a budget for a reason. It is actually a work plan. It is part of the planning of how you're going to roll your project out. And Dan's going to talk more about that. Have someone proofread your application before submitting. I know it sounds simple, but the number of times there's really simple stuff in there that hasn't had the opportunity to be corrected is often. Make sure you use the latest templates from our website. We do update them from time to time. So if you're using one from 2 years ago, it's not going to make sense. Cross-check your work plan values. So that bit down the bottom, circled in red, if that doesn't match what's in your application, sometimes it's really difficult for us to know how much you're actually asking for. And use the Volunteers WA calculator. It's a fantastic resource. Again, if you need any support in how to make that work, one of the team are more than happy to help you. So important. Are you up to date with your progress reporting, variations and acquittals of existing projects? This is really important stuff. It's a bit of a carrot and stick for us. It's one of the few opportunities we get to touch base and say, you know, are you on track? Those of you who have had grants with us know that we are fully supportive of variations. It's part of good and healthy project management. If something's not working, why would you continue doing it and waste money? We would rather do a variation and get a great outcome. And I know that's not how all programs work, but it is how how we work. So please don't be afraid of coming to us and saying, this isn't working, we need to do something else. Just going through these are elements of the application. Have you obtained your permissions and authorizations? Have you consulted with your stakeholders? Very important. And have you considered the risks to the success of the project? What are the things that could be deal breakers? Really important to consider hygiene, and particularly in these tricky times. Hygiene, including pests and diseases, particularly dieback. And obviously the health and safety of your people. And that's really important in these times. And I have no idea what time I am, what time frame I've actually done. I don't know whether I'm ahead of time, behind time. I've raced through that thinking that I don't have that much time. So I'd really love to take any questions. The other thing to consider as well is that we are running one-on-one Zoom meetings. So one of my team will be available to actually either talk you through a concept, a project concept, or have a look at your draft application before you submit it, or both of those things. I can't recommend enough, please don't leave it till the last week, because we, one, may not get time to do it, and if we do get time to do it, it'll be so rushed that you might get some rather brutal feedback, which is not how we like to do things. So yeah, I'm really happy to take any questions. I'm not sure if we're doing that now or a little later, Karen, but I think I'm done.